I'd learned early in my career that power didn't always come from the loudest voice in the room, it came from the person everyone turned to when things got messy. That was me at Stonewall Industries. I was the strategist Ethan Stonewall called when a deal was on the brink of collapse, the one who stayed in the boardroom long after everyone else had gone home, polishing a proposal until it was bulletproof. I'd just landed the biggest win of my career. No build-up, no reason. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. "Excuse me?" I asked, thinking I'd misheard him. But his expression didn't change, and his voice was flat. "Your position is terminated, effective immediately. HR will finalize the paperwork." A folder sat on his desk, neatly closed. My severance, my dismissal letter, all prepared before I'd even walked in. I'd been blindsided, in front of the board no less, told to pack my things and leave like I'd done something shameful. I remember gripping the folder so tightly the edges bent, forcing myself to keep my chin high as I walked past my coworkers, ignoring their whispered speculation. I didn't cry. Not then. Not when I cleared my desk, not when I handed in my badge. I saved it for later, alone in my apartment, where no one could see the hurt under the anger. And under that anger, a vow formed. I would never work for Ethan Stonewall again. Or his brother, Liam, handsome, charming, just as dangerous in his own way. The Stonewall name was poison, and I was done drinking from that cup. The months that followed were brutal, but they rebuilt me. I scraped together my savings, called in every favor I was owed, and launched my own consultancy. At first, it was small, projects other firms didn't want, clients on the brink of collapse. But word spread. I had a knack for spotting holes in a strategy and filling them before the competition even realized there was a leak. I didn't just fix problems. I made people money, big money. Within 2 years, my firm was thriving. I was taking on international clients, expanding into markets I'd once only studied from afar. I was my own boss, and I had one rule: I didn't touch anything connected to Stonewall Industries. Not even if they offered me the world. That rule kept me sane. It kept me from wondering why Ethan had done it, from picking apart the look in his eyes that day. Cool, almost calculated, like he'd been cutting out a tumor instead of a person. I'd almost forgotten the sound of his voice when my assistant forwarded an email from one of the largest tech conglomerates in the country. They wanted me to head the strategy for a groundbreaking project, a luxury wearable that could dominate the global market. It was the kind of deal that could take my firm from impressive to untouchable. There was just one problem. The manufacturing and logistics arm of the project had already been contracted to Stonewall Industries. I stared at the email for a long time, weighing my options. Turning it down would mean walking away from more money and influence than I'd ever seen in one place. Accepting it would mean walking straight back into the den I'd sworn off. My gut twisted at the thought of sitting across from Ethan again, but business wasn't about comfort, it was about opportunity. And this opportunity was too big to let pride get in the way. I told myself it was just a deal, a temporary arrangement, nothing personal. I could keep my distance, keep my power. But as I typed the reply confirming my interest, a part of me knew it wasn't going to be that simple. Because with the Stonewalls, nothing ever was. I told myself I would treat the offer like any other high-stakes engagement, define the scope, price the risk, draft my terms, and never confuse momentum with safety. The tech conglomerate, Sterling Global, wanted speed and certainty, the two things most companies pretend to sell and almost none deliver. Their COO, a calm woman named Nora Chen, called me the morning after I replied and went straight to the point. They were planning a luxury wearable that could double as payment, ID, health tracker, and status symbol. The hardware pipeline was fragile, the launch window narrow, and the only manufacturer with the scale and discretion to pull it off on this timeline was Stonewall Industries. I listened, asked the questions that mattered, and refused to be flattered by the phrases people use when they need you more than they admit. Nora didn't bother with flattery. She talked metrics, failure points, and the price of missing Christmas season in 3 major markets. "We're prepared to pay your full rate with a success kicker," she said, "but the kicker only pays if Stonewell stays in the deal and delivers." There it was, the string tied to the prize. I didn't answer right away. I turned to the window and watched the city shake itself awake, cars threading between towers I used to walk into with a badge that no longer worked. "If I say yes," I said finally, "I control integration. I choose the launch cities. I pick the crisis protocol chain and the escalation thresholds. I don't answer to Stonewell. I answer to you." Nora said that was exactly why she had called me. We set a working session for Friday to outline the first 90 days. I hung up, sent a message to my team leads to clear their calendars, and then sat very still, letting the old anger try and fail to find a landing. The rule I had made after getting fired, never again with the Stonewells, had kept me clean and focused. But rules are tools, not prisons, and the right tool for this job was leverage. If I stepped back into their orbit, it would be as a planet with its own gravity. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Heard you're talking to Sterling. Coffee, L." I stared at the initial for a full second before a memory surfaced. Easy smile, late night laugh, blue eyes that never stayed solemn for long. "Liam." I typed and erased 3 replies before settling on the truth. "Busy." He answered 2 dots, then, "I'll make it worth your time." I almost told him time with the Stonewells had already cost me enough, then decided I didn't owe him a story. He sent a location anyway, an art gallery pop-up in a glass cube 4 blocks from my office, half the city's investor class likely to be there pretending to love art more than deals. I didn't confirm. I also didn't delete the message. Instead, I went back to the work that had saved me after Ethan ended my career. Preparation so ruthless there was no room left for nerves. I rebuilt the org map for Stonewell from public filings, back-channel notes, and the quiet gossip that floats between assistants who notice everything. I flagged the executives who had sided with Ethan the day he fired me and the ones who had gone silent instead of speaking up. I mapped the factories in their network that could pivot from other wearables to Sterling spec without blowing up margins. I wrote 3 integration plans. One assuming full cooperation from Stonewell, one assuming passive resistance, and one assuming open war masked as professionalism. Then I set my price. If the world wanted my certainty, it would pay for it. By Friday, Sterling had wired the retainer, booked a secure floor at their tower, and put their senior product team at my disposal. Nora arrived at the war room with her sleeves rolled and a face that said she did not care about the Stonewell family tree. She wanted results, and she had read every deliverable I'd ever sent to anyone. We worked for 6 straight hours, stopping only long enough to inhale cold dumplings and circle 3 red dates on a calendar: executive alignment, first manufacturing trial, and closed-door investor preview. At 5, Nora slid a slim folder across the table. "Stonewell wants a preliminary alignment meeting Monday morning," she said. "Both brothers will be there. If you prefer, I can ask for separate sessions." I didn't let my pause show. Separate would be easier, cleaner, less oxygen for whatever private war Ethan and Liam had been fighting since birth. Together would be faster. "All in one room," I said. "No cameras. No PR. Done." She stood, gathered her notes, and offered a hand like a contract. "Welcome back to the jungle." After Nora left, I stared at the empty chairs around the table and let the old loop try to play. Ethan at the window, the folder on his desk, the sentence that ripped the floor out from under me. I shut it off. I wasn't that woman anymore, the one who confused approval with safety. I locked the war room and walked out into the blue hour of a city that had never done me a single favor. I didn't go home. I went to the glass cube gallery, because sometimes the smartest move is the one where you look your ghosts dead in the eye before they can haunt you. The crowd was a curated mess of velvet jackets and sharp heels. Sculptures sat on white plinths like captured moons. I found Liam in the center of a small orbit, women laughing, 2 founders pitching in low voices. He excused himself the second he saw me, crossed the floor with that easy stride he'd perfected in boardrooms and on red carpets. "You came," he said, like it was a surprise instead of a decision I'd torn in half and taped back together. "For 10 minutes, I said. "What do you need?" "To say I'm glad," he answered, not missing a beat. Sterling couldn't have picked better. "I was not here for flattery. If you wanted to talk business, you could have emailed." He smiled because he knew I'd ignored his first message. "Emails don't tell the truth," he said. "Eyes do." His stayed on me for a second too long, mindful but not apologetic. He asked if I had any conditions he should know before Monday, if there were lines he shouldn't cross. I told him my lines were simple. "Don't lie to me, don't use me to score points against your brother, and don't mistake my presence for consent to old games." He lifted a hand in a mock oath. "Scout's honor." "You were never a scout," I said. "You hated uniforms." He laughed, surprised I remembered. I remembered too much, things I didn't need, like the way he had once walked me to a cab after a charity dinner, hands in pockets, head tilted, saying he liked the way I didn't rush my sentences. None of that mattered now. Before I could leave, a ripple moved through the room. Heads turned. The air sharpened like it does right before a storm. I knew the feeling without looking. When I did, Ethan was already there, framed by glass and night and the attention of people who would always prefer a shark to a saint. He wore a dark suit and the expression of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to clear a path. Our eyes caught, and for a beat the gallery was silent to me. Not from longing. From recognition. The kind that says, "Here is the thing I survived." He didn't come over. He didn't have to. The space shifted anyway, as if the floor remembered a weight it had carried before. Liam glanced between us, his mouth tilting. "Monday then," he said, and for once he didn't push for more. I left with my spine straight and my pulse steady, not because I felt nothing but because I chose what to feel. That night I wrote one more plan, not for Sterling, not for Stonewall, but for myself. If Ethan tried to cut me out, I'd route around him. If Liam tried to charm me into a corner, I'd move the wall. If either turned this into a fight over me instead of a fight for the deal, I'd walk and take my certainty with me. Then I slept like a general before a campaign, heartbeat even, mind quiet, ready. Monday morning arrived with the pale light of a city pretending it wasn't built on conflict. I dressed in a black suit with clean lines, tied my hair back, and wore no jewelry that could be used as an anchor for someone else's assumptions. In the car, I reviewed the talking map I'd built, outcomes first, egos later, non-negotiables at the top. When the Stonewall Tower rose into view, all glass and ambition, I felt the echo of the day I had walked out with a box under my arm. I let the echo pass through me and fade. The elevator doors opened to the executive floor and the carpet swallowed the sound of my steps the way it always had. The receptionist's smile faltered when she read my name, then tightened back into place like a trained muscle. A security badge appeared as if conjured. No escort offered, none needed. I pushed open the boardroom doors and walked in, exactly on time, the only thing I'd ever given the Stonewalls without a fight. Ethan stood at the far end of the table, hands braced on polished wood, Liam lounging on the left as if he owned the hour. For a second none of us spoke. Then I set my folder down, met both their eyes in turn, and said the only greeting I was willing to give. "Let's work." The boardroom smelled faintly of leather and the faint metallic tang of fresh coffee in porcelain cups, Ethan's style, precise and controlled. He didn't offer me a seat, but I didn't wait for him to. I chose one directly across from him, placing my folder exactly in the center of my space, and took my time opening it. Liam gave me a lazy grin from the side, as if to say this was all a game and he'd been waiting for me to play. "Ava," Ethan said at last, his tone so neutral it was practically engineered. "You've been briefed on the course scope?" I didn't look up from my notes when I answered. "I've been briefed on what Sterling expects. Whether Stonewall can deliver that without compromising the timeline is why I'm here." The flicker in his gaze was brief, but I caught it, recognition that I was not here to be managed. "We can deliver," Ethan said, his voice clipped, "but we'll do it my way. Too many moving pieces for improvisation." "Improvisation isn't the same as adaptation," I replied evenly, sliding a printed workflow toward him. "Your current process adds 12 unnecessary days to the first trial run. My way gets you there faster without cutting compliance corners." Liam leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "She's right. Ethan, your system's solid, but it's rigid. This is a product launch, not a museum exhibition. We can't treat it like a relic." Ethan didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on me. "We don't gamble with millions of dollars in play." "It's only a gamble if you don't prepare for the variables," I countered, my voice calm but certain. I'd been in too many rooms where men mistook steady tone for lack of conviction. This wasn't one of them. Ethan was listening, even if his pride made him look like he wasn't. Liam sat back, a satisfied curve to his mouth, like he enjoyed watching the two of us measure each other. "Fine," Ethan said finally. "Show me exactly where you'd cut the time." I stood and crossed to the wall-mounted screen, connecting my tablet. My slides weren't flashy, no animations, no filler. But each one was an unarguable step in a cleaner, faster process. I walked them through supplier integration points, warehouse routing optimizations, and QA batch adjustments, each backed by numbers and case studies. Ethan didn't interrupt once, which was its own kind of concession. When I finished, Liam gave a low whistle. "Well, I'm sold." "Ethan?" Ethan's jaw worked once before he nodded. "Implement your adjustments. But if we hit a snag, you'll own it completely." "That's already in my contract," I said, returning to my seat. The rest of the meeting flowed with the same undercurrent, Ethan and I testing each other with precision, Liam jumping in to provoke or defuse depending on his mood. By the end, the launch calendar was locked, the next 90 days mapped, and Nora's signature still drying on the approval memo. As we packed up, Liam walked with me to the elevator. "You two could kill each other or conquer the world. I'm not sure which it'll be." "Neither am I admitted. He grinned like that was the best answer I could have given. I thought that was the end of it until the elevator doors slid shut and I caught movement in the reflection, Ethan, striding toward us before the gap closed. He stopped the doors with one hand, stepping inside. "We're not finished," he said, pressing the button for the executive lounge floor. "We agreed on the plan," I replied, but he shook his head. "That's not the part I'm talking about." The lounge was empty when we entered, all glass walls and low leather chairs, the city stretching out in every direction. Ethan stood near the window, hands in his pockets, watching me. "You didn't flinch once today," he said. "Most people do." "Maybe you're losing your edge," I said lightly. His mouth didn't curve, but his eyes shifted, almost amused. "Or maybe you've gained yours." There was a beat of silence before he added, "I'm not going to apologize for firing you." "I didn't expect you to," I answered. "I did expect you to at least be honest about why." His gaze held mine, steady, weighing. "I thought you leaked confidential plans to Liam." At the time, the evidence lined up. "It lined up because someone made sure it did," I said sharply. "Did you ever consider I might be worth defending before you cut me out?" His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed low. "I considered that protecting the company was more important than protecting you." Good to know where I ranked. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. "I was wrong," he said simply. No excuses, no elaboration, just the admission. I didn't look back, but the words followed me into the elevator, pressing under my skin in a way I didn't want to name. By the time I returned to my office, my team was already moving on the revised schedule. I buried myself in the work, but Ethan's voice kept echoing in my mind. Not the part about being wrong, but the fact that he'd said it at all. It wasn't an apology, but it was a crack in the armor. And cracks, I knew, were where the light got in, or where everything fell apart. The following weeks blurred into a rhythm I hadn't expected: strategy sessions in glass conference rooms, factory walkthroughs that smelled of steel and machine oil, late-night calls to solve problems before they became headlines. On paper, I was Sterling's lead strategist, contracted to coordinate with Stonewall Industries. In reality, I was the gravitational center between two brothers who couldn't decide if they wanted to outmaneuver each other or win me over. Ethan was methodical. Every time we worked together, his questions were precise, never wasted. He pushed back on my proposals only when he had an alternative backed by data, and even then, I noticed he was starting to phrase his objections less like orders and more like challenges, an unspoken invitation for me to sharpen them further. Liam, on the other hand, treated every interaction like an opening move in a chess game where the stakes weren't just the deal. He'd drop by my office under the guise of aligning on outreach strategy and end up steering the conversation toward rooftop wine tastings or last-minute tickets to a jazz club he knew I liked. I kept the boundaries clear, but his casual charm had a way of testing them. One Thursday, we had a joint strategy dinner with Sterling's executives in a private dining room overlooking the river. Ethan arrived exactly on time, in a dark suit that made him look like he'd been carved from focus itself. Liam swept in 10 minutes later with a half-smile and a story about being held up by a street performer who refused to let him pass until he guessed the next chord of a song. Sterling's team loved him instantly. I watched the two of them from across the table, the way Ethan's posture stiffened every time Liam got a laugh, the way Liam's gaze flicked to me when he landed a point. Somewhere between the third course and dessert, Ethan leaned in, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You realize he's using you to get under my skin." I didn't flinch. "And you're letting him?" His eyes narrowed, but before he could reply, Liam cut in from my other side, sliding a dish of dark chocolate toward me. "You have to try this. Trust me, you'll regret it if you don't." I took a piece, not because I trusted him, but because it was easier than letting them see the tug-of-war they were both pretending not to play. After dinner, I stayed behind to review some last-minute adjustments to the production timeline. Ethan came back into the room after walking Sterling's CEO to the car. "Walk with me," he said. I almost told him I was too busy, but something in his tone, steady, almost measured, made me follow. We ended up in the empty hallway leading to the executive balcony. The city lights below glittered like a second sky. "Liam's going to keep pushing," Ethan said, standing close enough that I could catch the faint scent of his cologne. "That's what he does. He'll charm you, distract you, make it feel like the easier path." "And you'll do what?" I asked, tilting my head. "Stand here and warn me?" His gaze didn't waver. "I'll make sure you see the difference between someone who wants you in their world because it's convenient, and someone who wants you there because it's better with you in it." The words hung between us, heavier than the night air. I broke the silence first, stepping back just enough to reclaim the space. "Careful, Ethan. Sounds like you're competing for more than the deal." His mouth almost curved. "Maybe I am." I left before he could say more, but the echo of his voice stayed with me the rest of the night. And as much as I hated to admit it, I was starting to wonder if the competition I'd stepped into wasn't just between brothers, but between the walls I'd built around myself and the temptation to see what might happen if I let one of them down. The next few days, I tried to drown out the memory of Ethan's words in the noise of deadlines and logistics calls, but the truth was, he'd managed to wedge himself into the quiet spaces of my mind. Not in a sentimental way, not even in a way I trusted, but in a way that made me curious. I wasn't naive enough to think curiosity was harmless, not with a man like him. Still, there was work to be done, and Sterling's schedule didn't care about my personal distractions. The product's first manufacturing trial was scheduled for Friday at a Stonewall facility 2 hours outside the city. Sterling's engineers, Stonewall's operations team, and my consultants would all be on site. It was the perfect chance to see if the revised workflow I'd pushed through could stand up to real-world pressure. I arrived early, hard hat and steel-toed boots in hand, and was halfway through a floor inspection when I spotted Liam chatting with one of the production leads. He caught sight of me and strolled over, grinning like he owned the place. Didn't think you were the boots-on-the-ground type, he teased, eyeing my gear. I'm whatever type gets results, I said, scanning the line where robotic arms assembled circuit housings. Speaking of results, are your distribution contacts still lined up for the West Coast launch? Already confirmed, he said, then leaned closer. You know, you could make my life easier by admitting I'm your favorite Stonewall. I didn't bother answering that. Instead, I moved toward the control station, where Ethan was speaking to the plant manager. He looked different here, no suit, just a fitted black shirt and work pants, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. The sight caught me off guard for half a second, but I masked it quickly. We're about to start the first batch, he said, handing me a clipboard with the QA checklist I'd designed. If your adjustments fail, we lose 3 days. They won't fail, I replied, scanning the numbers. The trial began, the floor filling with the hum of machinery and the sharp scent of soldering. My team monitored each stage while I tracked time metrics, and by the end of the run, we'd shaved off exactly the 12 days I'd promised. The plant manager was impressed, Sterling's engineers were ecstatic. Ethan simply met my gaze and gave a single, deliberate nod. For him, it was almost extravagant praise. As we wrapped up, a sudden downpour hit, trapping us inside until it passed. Liam disappeared to check on something but didn't return. Ethan and I ended up waiting near the loading docks, the sound of rain on metal echoing in the cavernous space. You were right, he said finally. I turned to him. About? The adjustments. I should have trusted you from the start. His voice was quieter than usual, stripped of the sharp edge he used in meetings. When I fired you, I told myself it was the right decision for the company. Maybe it was easier to believe that than to admit I'd made a mistake. I studied him for a moment, the honesty in his tone unsettling in a way his arrogance never had. Why are you telling me this now? Because we're working together again, and I don't want you thinking I can't see your value, he said. Then, after a pause, and because I don't want to waste the chance to fix what I broke. My heart gave a single, unwelcome thud before I stepped back, putting space between us. Fixing it doesn't mean going back to how things were. That's not an option. I know, he said simply, as if that were enough. The rain eased, and we left without another word. But on the drive back to the city, I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if maybe, just maybe, the man who'd once cut me out without hesitation was now fighting, quietly, deliberately, to pull me back in. The storm at the plant rinsed the dust off the week but not the static in my head, because the more Ethan shifted from hard edges to honest ones, the more the ground under my rule, never again with the Stonewalls, felt like it was moving. I refused to let it. The next morning I was back at Sterling's tower before sunrise, coffee in hand, voice steady as I ran the daily stand-up, assigned blockers, and pushed procurement to accelerate a materials test most people would have punted to next quarter. Nora watched me with that flinty approval she reserved for people whose results outran their reputations, then slid a thin envelope across the table when the room cleared. Anonymous drop, she said. Might be nothing. Might be everything. Inside were 2 color printouts and a USB. The first printout was a calendar invite from 3 years ago, a meeting between Stonewall's then VP of Strategy, Marla Tate, and a rival supplier the company had blacklisted. The second was a partial email thread that looked innocuous until you noticed the CC line, my name added at the very end, timestamped 10 minutes before Ethan fired me. The USB held security footage clips stitched into a neat little reel. Marla leaving a conference room with a folder, Marla entering Liam's assistant's bullpen and setting that same folder on a desk while the assistant was in a huddle, Marla walking away empty-handed and checking her watch like a woman waiting to hear an explosion go off 2 floors up. I sat there with the ghost of the old humiliation creeping along my spine, then I pressed it flat with a palm on cool glass. Where did this come from? I asked. Nora shrugged. Through the general tip line. No metadata worth anything. You want me to send it to Stonewall Compliance? No, I said, too fast, then softened it. Not yet. If the leak was engineered, the person who benefits most from chaos will try to trigger another hit as we get closer to launch. I can use that. I spent the next hour cross-checking every timestamp with my own email archive, then I called my operations lead and told her to sandbox our shared folders, lock down our version history, and put tripwires on any file with the Sterling codename. I wasn't going to let the past write the sequel. Around noon, Liam texted a selfie from a warehouse where he was heroically moving pallets, which meant he was wearing a neon vest and standing just far enough from the work to keep his shoes spotless. He asked if I'd meet him at a late lunch spot near the river. I ignored it. 20 minutes later he called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, and because the man had a gift for persistence that oscillated between endearing and reckless, I answered. If you're bleeding, call a doctor, I said. If you're bored, call someone else. Neither, he said cheerfully. I have intel. And pie. I told him I don't do intel for dessert and he said I was lying, because everyone does intel for dessert. I almost hung up, then the part of me that valued information above comfort said fine, 20 minutes, my table, no theatrics. Liam delivered a clean summary of a rumor that someone in Stonewall's old guard was trying to push Nora into swapping our approved chipset supplier for a trusted legacy vendor with a history of overpromising and underdelivering. He slid me a name, not with triumph but with the grim satisfaction of a man who grew up watching quiet coups. Marla, he said. She's angling for a consultancy comeback. She thinks if she can sour Sterling's launch under your plan, she can sell Ethan a return to the tried and true. I felt my mouth go cool. You're sure? Sure enough to bet a Mont Blanc, he said, tapping the pen in his pocket. Don't take it. I like it too much. Keep your pen, I said, standing. And keep breathing. If she thinks you're a pathway to me, she'll try to use you again. He sobered. I know. He didn't reach for my arm when I turned to go. I registered the restraint and filed it next to all the ways he chose to make himself look easy when he was actually watchful. Back at my office, I built the counter, 2 parallel purchase orders, identical on the surface, one real, one salted with a microscopic flaw and a spec code only a thief in a hurry would miss. I routed the real one through the standard chain and parked the decoy in a folder with enough visibility to tempt anyone peeking where they shouldn't. Then I called Ethan. We've got a ghost, I said. If you want to fix this correctly, we do it together. He didn't ask for proof. He told me to be in his office at 7. I arrived 5 minutes early to find him in shirtsleeves again, tie loose, eyes flat with the kind of focus that cuts without drawing blood. I dropped the envelope on his desk and watched him read every line, twice, the muscle in his jaw flickering only when Marla's name appeared. I should have caught this 3 years ago, he said finally. You should have asked the right question 3 years ago, I corrected, because I wasn't here to cushion regret. He accepted that without flinch, then called compliance, legal, and security, told them there was a controlled test in play and they were to follow my instructions as if they were his. For the next 2 hours we worked in ceaseless tandem, mapping who had access to which folders, which assistants covered which executives at which times, and how to bait a hook that would confirm our suspect without tipping our hand. It felt like old times in the worst and best way. 2 minds tuned to the same frequency, building a bridge while we ran across it. Around 9, he ordered food we didn't touch and coffee we did. Around 10, the first tripwire pinged. Someone had viewed the decoy purchase order from a workstation assigned to a floater assistant on Marla's contract roster. 3 minutes later, an edit, the flaw corrected, the vendor field overwritten with the trusted legacy name, the file resaved with a timestamp that tried very hard to look like it belonged. I sent the log to security. They confirmed the badge at that workstation had been used off schedule. Ethan exhaled once, a measured release. She's sloppy. She's arrogant, I said. Sloppy is a symptom. We let the line run an hour longer to see who bit next. 2 small bites, then a big one, a forward from Marla's private account to a senior controller who owed her favors from a prior regime. That was enough. Ethan stood, his voice going quiet in the way that means the temperature is actually dropping. I'll handle her. We'll handle her, I said, because I wasn't going to miss the chance to close the loop on the worst night of my early career. He didn't argue. He closed his laptop, shrugged on his jacket, and walked beside me to the elevator with a steadiness that had nothing to do with show and everything to do with intent. We found Marla in a glassed-in corner office she used like a stage when she wanted to be seen working late. She looked up with that polished surprise people practice in mirrors. Ethan, she said, eyes flicking to me for half a second. Ava. Long time. Not long enough, I said mildly, and set the folder on her desk. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He simply laid out the timeline, the log, the footage, and the transfer that tied her to the attempted supplier swap. He didn't give her space to spin a narrative, didn't let her redirect with credentials or old goodwill. When she said the words people say when they are cornered, "This is a misunderstanding," he said the words men like him rarely waste, "You made me fire the wrong person." She tried to pivot to Liam, to the old tale of mistaken loyalties. I cut in. "Don't drag his name into a story you wrote for yourself," I said, and the quiet loathing in my chest burned clean for the first time. "You framed me to look like a leak and you almost cost this company a strategist who could have saved you from your own mediocrity. Tonight you tried again. You're done." Security arrived like a full stop. Compliance took her badge. Legal handed her a document she should have asked for counsel before reading. Ethan stood beside me and didn't look away once. After they escorted her out, the office felt bigger, as if some old rusted weight had been pried loose. Ethan turned to me, and for a second there was nothing CEO about him, just a man who had finally seen the shape of a wound he'd left. "I should have believed you," he said. "You should have," I agreed, not to be cruel, but because truth is the only ground results can stand on. He nodded once, a concession and a promise. "I won't make that mistake again." We walked back to his office in near silence. At the door I paused and looked at the city sharpening into midnight. "Sterling's lock date for the chipset is in 48 hours, I said. "If there's going to be another hit, it'll be before then." "Then we stay ahead of it," he said. "Together." The word landed with a weight I couldn't ignore. I went home wired and wide awake, took a scalding shower, and stood by the window with a towel twisted in my hair, letting the cold air cool the heat under my skin. My phone buzzed again, Liam this time, the message brief for once, "Heard about the play. You okay?" I typed "I'm fine" and almost left it there, then added, "Watch your email. She's going to try to tie you to this." His reply came back immediately, already locked down. "Good hunting, Ava." I slept 3 hours and woke clear. The day sprinted past in a blur of signatures and sign-offs, but under it all I could feel a shift. The way Sterling's engineers watched me with outright confidence now, the way Stonewell's middle managers stepped a little faster when I asked for a file, the way Nora's eyes warmed as if the equation had decided itself. At sunset, she stepped into the war room and tapped the calendar where the final alignment meeting glowed in crimson. "Tomorrow," she said. "You'll have both brothers in front of you, and the room will take its cue from your first sentence." I nodded, aware of the electric hum that only ever comes before the big presentations or the big mistakes. On my way out, I found Ethan waiting by the elevator, jacket over his arm, tie back in place, mouth set like a man who had decided the past didn't get to write any more of this. "Walk?" he asked. We circled the block, the city speaking in steam and light. He didn't try to apologize again. He asked about my team's capacity, about my expansion goals, about the lines I intended to draw when the deal went public. And then, at a crosswalk where the signal counted down in red, he said, "If I had known who framed you then, I would have fought for you." "If you had trusted me then," I said, "you wouldn't have needed proof." The light changed. We crossed. He didn't defend himself. He said, "I know. When we reached my building, he didn't reach for me, didn't lean in, didn't press. He just said, "Tomorrow, I follow your lead in that room. Not because Sterling hired you. Because you're right." It should have been simple validation. It landed like a confession. I rode the elevator up alone, set my notes in a perfect stack, and stared at the ceiling until I could breathe around the fact that the man who once cut me out was now offering me the one thing I'd had to build from scratch: trust on my terms. And then the night threw its last card. A courier arrived at my door at 11:32 with a flat black envelope and no return address. Inside was a single sheet, a pitch deck cover with Liam's name on it and a line that said alternate launch plan, Ava to lead. A burner number was scrawled at the bottom with 4 words, "If you want out." I held the page between my fingers and felt the city tilt. The deadline clock was already ticking. In less than 48 hours, the biggest deal of my career would lock. In less than 24, I would walk into a room where 2 brothers would try to pull me into 2 different futures. And for the first time since Ethan fired me, I realized the choice ahead wasn't about survival. It was about the kind of power I wanted to hold, and whose hand, if any, I would take while I held it. Tomorrow, I walk into that room knowing one truth: only one of them will leave with what they want. The real question is, which one will it be?